Hi, my name is Emma O'Rourke, and I will be responding to the claim, with the current population rising at an alarming rate, the need for sustainable energy is on the rise. My opponent's secondary claims were, number one, an increase in population puts a strain on agriculture. We need sustainability not only for ourselves, but for the well-being of our future generations. If we do not act now, we will soon be dealing with repercussion. Number two, the environment must be kept in control so that it can support the increase in population so that we do not damage our environment to the point that it is too costly to repair. And number three, although an increase in population would increase the labor force worldwide, which is a positive effect, the increase in the number of people would consequently result in higher demand for fossil fuels, which leads to negative effects to the climate. So, my response to those claims are that, number one, the main claim isn't really controversial, and number two, the speaker provides information throughout the whole speech that actually proves that the topic isn't even a matter that needs to be argued in the first place. So my response to secondary claim one, which was the one about the increase in population putting a strain on agriculture, he talks about how agriculture can't keep up with the growing population, and I actually did some research on my own and found that food and agriculture in hunger isn't an immediate or growing problem. I found an article on The Economist, and it said, stocks of grain and other foods are high, with another bumper harvest due in the northern hemisphere this year. Food prices have been dropping in real terms since a spike in 2011. The number of hungry people has been falling too by 167 million in the past decade. And then he also mentions that the U.S. already has the resources and energy that it needs to provide sustainable energy. So that just kind of already goes to show that there's nothing that really needs to be argued if we already have what we need. And then in response to secondary claim two, which was the one about the environment has to be kept in control so that it can support the increasing population. He offers facts about the estimated amount of people starving in Africa and China, as well as some facts on China's level of pollution, but nothing else. He doesn't really give any explanation on how serious these countries' circumstances really are or how we can fix them. And the fact that he only gives two countries as an example kind of leads me to believe that there isn't enough evidence to kind of give an example for the state of the whole entire world. And then in response to secondary claim three, which was the one about the population increasing the labor force, which is a good thing, but the increase in number of people would consequently result in higher demand for fossil fuels. So since he said that the increase in population would increase the workforce, which increases fossil fuels, this kind of conflicts with the rest of the points that he makes for that secondary claim, because he also states that the increase in population will allow for more people to do research on sustainable energy, which, remember, we're already in the process of obtaining. So I don't know, this kind of doesn't really coincide with what he was trying to say in the first place. And then he also brings up algae biofuel, and he says how it's a step to sustainability and it's in the process of becoming ideal, and that it's created countless jobs and will continue to create more as time goes on. This doesn't really go along with the whole main claim because it has nothing to do with explaining why it's so urgent that we need sustainable energy. It just tells us how we're already in the process of already utilizing it. So since the U.S. is already working towards sustainable energy and there's no foreseeable agricultural crisis or other problems due to the growing population that aren't already in the process of being solved, there's essentially not really a point to argue, and it's not really controversial. So, thank you.
All right, the layout of the points is fine. It does take a little bit of time, though, and so you spend almost 20% of your speaking time kind of reminding us what the advocate's points were at the beginning. It would be probably best to edit that a little bit. Your position seems to be that there's not really any dispute, and some of the positions are not controversial because, in fact, the advocate is demonstrating that we're already making progress on those particular issues. I think that's a reasonable point to make if you think that there isn't a controversy or an argument here and that they failed to make an important inference. That seems like a reasonable challenge to the argument that from the respondent's perspective, from your perspective. The first point was the one place where I did see some attempt to directly contradict the advocate's information, suggesting that food and agriculture is not an immediate problem, that there isn't any demonstration that there's a stress on it, and in fact you have some counter evidence that shows that prices have been decreasing, the number of hungry people has been lowered, and things are going pretty well. So you've got a good counterclaim on that particular point. And then there's an argument that says that the United States already has sustainability, and so that in essence the advocate has undermined their argument there by saying that we've achieved these kinds of sustainable goals. I guess then the only inference would be is it sustainable worldwide, and you might want to point out that the advocate didn't really identify the degree of sustainability. How do we measure those things? I think there's some criticism about the technical stuff that would be appropriate too, but your answer for the most part is reasonable. I think on the second point, the challenge to the pollution mentioned in China and in Africa, and Africa, by the way, is not a country, it's a whole continent, so I'm not sure that the argument that you're saying that, well, they're only talking about two countries, so we can't really generalize from that. China just happens to be the most populous country in the world, and Africa is a big damn continent and not just a country, so I'm not sure that that's the best way to respond to that particular point. There are, so there are some issues there. I do think that you could probably point out that, like all developing countries, they run into problems, but they usually adjust to those problems as they go along and find solutions. The United States has done a lot to mitigate pollution as it became an industrialized power and became more and more prominent in its economy, and we realized that we were making problems for ourselves, and we started finding solutions for those problems. I think the argument here is that the idea that they won't address those issues ignores most people's self-interest. They can't, if they're killing themselves, they're going to say, we got to stop doing that, and they'll do some other things. And we've already got some tools to do that. All they have to do is talk to us, because we figured out some of those things. I think that would be maybe a little bit stronger argument on that point. And then on the labor force issue, it's kind of an interesting argument. Well, if there are more people, there's more ability to do research on sustainability. I guess that seems a little bit thin there.
That's what he said.
Yeah, I like I said, I think both of those are just... The better argument seems to be that an increased population is desirable for economic success, and that it's economic success that's going to produce these long-term solutions to these problems. When people have the ability to worry about other things, what we sometimes refer to them as first world problems, when they're not worrying about starving to death or absolute poverty, then they can worry about the other kinds of things like sustainability and quality of life and those kinds of things. And that's an advantage that comes from having a population that increases and a labor force that benefits us that way. The algae biofuel thing, I think, is a good example. I like the way you used it. Look, we're already doing this, so what is the argument here? You've described the present system, you've described what's happening. Why are we having an argument? I think that that's a reasonable conclusion to the presentation. All right, thank you.